I hope you're curious about Alaska's economy. It's fascinating. It's unusual. Those of you who have lived here your whole lives, I came here early in my career, but we assume a lot of things are normal that very much aren't. And I think it's helpful for us to kind of recognize how we are different. So a little bit of talk about that. The main reason Carrie Ann asked me to talk was because we just released a new 10-year industry and occupation projection set. We do it every 2 years. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about where we are now, because we know a lot more about where we are now and where we've been than where we're going. And we'll talk more about that. A couple of years ago, people started talking about recessions. And they asked us, among others, are we in a recession? And part of our response was, well, what do you mean, a recession? Generally, you don't talk about recessions at the state level. I had a long, friendly conversation with my California colleague about whether you can even have a state recession. Where I come down on it is that recession just means a broad downturn. And we even did an article saying, let's put some definitional teeth around that, and it was basically 3/4 of job losses. So having defined it, yes, we are and have been in a recession since late 2015. And this chart shows that the losses were worst in 16, a little less in 17. 18 is, those numbers are still preliminary. But we'll have a third consecutive year of job losses in 2018. Right now we're thinking about what 2019 will bring. So, and this, kind of going back to what I was talking about a minute ago, this is Alaska's history with recessions. And there are a lot of potentially interesting things here. So just to orient you, that's job growth by percent going clear back to the 70s. So in the 70s, we had, and I wouldn't even really call that a recession. We finished TAPS, right? And a lot of those jobs just went away. We always knew they were, but we roared out of it. The early 80s, we grew strongly, and then we had a nasty recession in the 80s, long stretch of fairly moderate growth. During that period, the US had 2 recessions, including a really, well, I don't know, a very rough one. The big US recession was the one that we just barely dipped below the line in 2009. And then this current recession, you can see, not as bad as the 80s in terms of how deep it was, but it's already gone on longer than the 80s. We're about 3 years in now. It hasn't hit all parts of the state equally. So if we're red or shades of red, that's negative. If it's blue or shades of blue, positive. You can see at the darkest red, North Slope, no surprise. And then Anchorage, you can see pretty good losses. But parts of the state, especially parts that are primarily tourism, some of them that are fishing, although you see a mix there, have done okay in terms of jobs. Here's the latest count of where we've lost jobs. Oil and gas jobs, almost 5,000 jobs. And a little more context for that, we were at our peak at about 15,000. So and now we're well below 10,000. So you lose 5,000 jobs, a third of the industry's jobs. They average about 150 grand. We're talking $750 million just in wages, to say nothing of taxes, to say nothing of related construction and engineering. And so that's a wallop for an economy, and it was. And you see some of the things that professional business services, so that's the engineers, the geologists, the accountants. So some of that's oil related, some of it's not. Retail, that's kind of a second wave. When an economy gets shaken, then among other things, some people move out. The people here are a little more reluctant to spend. And on top of all that, we've got Amazon. So retail's a little bit in flux broadly anyway. Construction, those are also meaningful losses in terms of percentage of total. State government, do not let anybody tell you state government has not cut jobs. It's cut a lot of jobs. Whether it's cut budget, those questions are very complicated. But that's a big loss of state government jobs. Manufacturing, it's mostly seafood processing. On the other side, and we'll talk a little bit more about healthcare, we had almost 4,000 healthcare jobs during this period. And and I'll touch on this now. Healthcare jobs are interesting because I don't know how many of you were here last year, but we talked about what Alaska offers to the national and international economy. We've got to sell something, whether it's a good or a service, to bring money into our economy to circulate. That's how economies work. Healthcare does that sometimes. So Medicaid expansion is an example. That's federal dollars coming into Alaska. So that's creating some economic activity. Something else it does, if we get healthcare here that we would have to go outside to get, it's called import substitution, money does circulate here that otherwise would be lost to our economy. But healthcare, with those two exceptions, it's us spending existing money, and whether it's a qualified positive. It's certainly a positive for all these new nurses, my daughter among them, who have jobs. But for an economy, you can't live on healthcare growth indefinitely. So just, there's a difference between healthcare growth, for example, than tourism, fishing, mining, oil and gas. Those things all bring money into our economy and circulate and provide lots of other economic activity. Then you see the others that have grown a little bit over that period. So on to this, what we believe is going to happen over this decade to 2026. 2016 is the base because it takes a while for the numbers to be finalized. Some of you may, if you're paying attention, see, wait a minute, how does this mesh with what we heard this morning about the Renaissance and this new juice in the oil and gas industry, all that's happening on the North Slope? And we'll talk a little bit about that, and if we don't, then please raise your hand and we'll talk about it after I'm done. So by industries, companies are assigned to an industry, individuals are assigned to an occupation. So we won't get too hung up on that, but there's healthcare, right? Still, it sticks way out. It's 12% about of our job force. About 60% of the growth over this decade is expected to be healthcare again. There have been a few times that we've been doing this, we thought, okay, we're done with healthcare growth. Then it slows a little bit and then it roars back again. We're probably more confident than ever that we're not done, partly because of the aging workforce, right? We and the country, Alaska a little more, not that we're older, but the percentage of people entering senior years is a little bigger. So we're quite confident that there's going to be more healthcare jobs over this decade. And then you see on down, and looking for industries that are most directly kind of connected to what you're doing, you see construction there. And then looking for, you go down a ways before you see mining, oil and gas. We'll do another round of these forecasts in 2 years, and if the things we heard about this morning are happening, and I believe they are, not all of them, because there are always a list of potential projects out there in Alaska. There are more now than there have been in a long time. So that energy, we're convinced that it's real. Part of this is the timing of when we did this forecast. But odds are good that when we do this 2 years from now, you'll see more growth projected for oil and gas. Mining's interesting. We'll see what happens with Donlin, but just a little note about that. So these are the occupations that are projected to grow the most. And you see, well, the first one, and I'm gonna, don't really expect you to read all those, just take a quick glance at them. And then I want to get to this slide. I might go back and forth so you can see it better. But what do those have in common when you look at those occupations? Okay, healthcare, obviously. But if anybody raises their hand and knows something else that's new to Alaska that shows up there at the very top, I'll be curious. What? Yeah, and what's driving that? Marijuana, right. Right. But this is percent. Marijuana is small and will remain small compared to other things in Alaska's economy. So once in a while we hear, well, here's the solution to Alaska's woes, marijuana taxes. And I think it's exceeded expectations. But that's kind of a side note. It is growing strongly. We don't know what the ceiling will be. But marijuana is at best a very small piece of the solution in terms of Alaska's long-term tax revenue issues. So let's look a little bit at the ones that are expected to shrink the most. And we see reporters and correspondents, we see editors. The first 5 are all media related. Right, so anything else you see those have in common? Shout it out if you see anything. A lot of technology. Technology is rendering obsolete a lot of occupations. It's not rendering obsolete media. It's just transforming it. When I started as a lawyer, all the lawyers had a legal secretary. And I remember thinking, what do I need somebody to type my stuff for? I can type my own stuff. So my legal secretary was kind of bored. And over time, legal secretaries kind of got transitioned. And not quite, not completely. But we had a lot more routine tasks. Automation, and the other big kind of theme, I guess, is AI. There are occupations that we won't need to do anymore because technology will take care of that for us. Lots of jobs. And even you think about coding. I heard recently coding, everybody thought, well, everybody's going to need to code. No, the coding will get easier. Pretty soon we'll speak what we want and the coding will take care of itself. So nobody should think that they're immune to the possibility of becoming irrelevant. And we'll come back to that a little bit. You got to keep learning. You got to keep up with what's happening, or you're more at risk of losing out here. And some of these, lawyers is one. Some of these, we make a point in the article, there's more self-employment for these. So these are jobs. These are wage and salary jobs. If you're working on your own as a blogger making good money, you're not showing up here, but you're still doing that thing. So this is a really key point. People have touched on a little bit. The things I just showed you were growth, occupational growth or the opposite. But 96% of all jobs will come from openings. So that's people retiring. We've got a big wave of retirements coming. And that's also people leaving the occupation, not moving from one hospital to a school to be a nurse. If they're staying a nurse, they're staying here, but leaving the occupation altogether. So if they leave the state. So most of the jobs, including, you could get a job still as a newspaper reporter because there will be people leaving those jobs. So when we put up the chart showing occupations that are shrinking, that doesn't mean they won't exist for a while yet. Because most of them will come from openings. But this and again, this is mostly a suggestion that you go to the article and look a little bit more. This is hard to read, but this is where the focus, I think, should be in terms of workforce development thinking. So these top jobs are jobs that pay more than average, and we've got them sorted by education. And so these are the ones that are expected to have a significant number of openings. And you see, these are bachelor's degree holders. So for example, there will be 200 total openings per year for airline pilots, 8 of those will come from growth, the other 192 from separations. You'll see registered nurses, that's as high as it gets still. 418 openings every year for 10 years. So what does that mean I'm actually talking to the university tomorrow about nursing. They're ramping up their programs. They won't be able to do it fast enough. We'll need we'll need every nurse that they can get through their programs. Here now we move into one, and I hope some of you will see what I'm going to talk about in just a minute, that this is associate degree, post-secondary, and you just glance quickly at what those occupations are. Again, to really get much out of this, you'd have to look at it and read what we talk about. But this one, high school diploma or equivalent, once in a while you hear, and there's certainly some truth to it, that the jobs of the future will all require a bachelor's degree or require more than a high school degree, more than a high school diploma. When you look at this, we've got this here as high school diploma or equivalent. Electrician, you can't come out of high school and get a job as an electrician. That's because of this kind of bogus, and part of this is imposed on us. We're part of a system. All states do it and the feds do it. But training requirements, we kind of artificially separate education from training. So you are not ready to be a carpenter, an electrician, a plumber, a pipe fitter, a diesel mechanic right out of high school. There's more training that's required. So I worry a little bit that the way we present this is misleading. So I wanted to make that point. And this related point, there will be lots of jobs for a long time that high school kids can get. They won't pay very much. When an economy is expanding, there are more people selling you coffee, there are more people renting you cars at the airport, there are more people selling T-shirts at the, all those things exist. So we shouldn't say all the jobs are going to require, but the jobs that pay well, the jobs that will be a career more than ever will require post-secondary training or education. Don't get lost in the smart kids go this way and the other kids go that way. That's never been less true than now, and technology will make that even more so. In fact, I was thinking when somebody was talking earlier, if anything, the consequences of mistakes in jobs, you think about if a plumber screws up, there's a real consequence. If somebody who's got a generic job in my office, for example, screws up, I mean, we'll hopefully catch the number. But the consequences of screwing up in some of these jobs that we've kind of historically considered non-academic are higher. A commercial pilot, all those things. And that's positive, this blurring of the line. The university's doing some interesting things with mixing the academic, and even as I say that, I cringe, the academic track, but training. And I heard somebody say last week, it's not training, it's not education, it's both, it's learning. It's learning. And this idea, this historical idea that we do our job training, whether it's law school or welding apprenticeship or whatever, and we're done, and then we work for a career. That's becoming less true. The learning continues. We see that in the occupations that bubble up, and we see it lots of other places. And this is, I'll let you read that. We make that point there. Basically, what I was doing much less clearly before. I'll just leave that for a second for you to read. And that's all I have. I'd be glad to answer any questions about that.
So you probably know the details better than I do, but we've seen that new businesses through entrepreneurship and startups have created between 4,000 and 6,000 new jobs every year. And actually, firms that have been around less than 5 years have accounted for about 90% of the new jobs that have been created. So we have a tremendous engine in this state that's creating new jobs, new innovative entrepreneurial ventures. And I'm curious what your perspective is, given this macro view you've just gone through, about what that tells us about what Alaska can and should be doing in the next 10 years to further support this innovative ecosystem and to change our perspective of how we take the challenges that we see in our state and turn them into opportunities for local solutions, local ventures, and then support them becoming globally successful companies and change the nature of our business from being natural resource extraction to value-added industries.
Yeah. I mean, occasionally somebody will ask us about to break up Alaska employers by size class. The dominant majority of Alaska employers are small employers. We haven't done as often new employers. That's the way we would get at it, to see who are the new employers. And then most relevantly, I think, the small employers that become big employers, because what's working, that's the success. And not necessarily, some companies deliberately stay small. But you think of Alaska Brewing, for example. It would have started small, now it's not. I don't know, I mean, to your specific question, the best answer I can think of for what Alaska does is not skimp on education and training and university. The data are pretty clear that states that have that have solid K-12 systems, that have solid university systems, that produces fruit. It's no accident that there's a lot happening in Northern California, where there are a lot of great schools. It's no accident that there's similar things in North Carolina and around Boise State and Massachusetts. But I wanted to say one thing. Alaska is and will be a resource-based economy. And I include in that tourism. And that doesn't mean that there won't be opportunities. Maybe, I don't know, more, but certainly opportunities to do tourism better, to capture more value from fishing. to capture more value from our mining resources, from our oil and gas resources. So sometimes I hear we need to diversify our economy. And I was, okay, what do you mean by that? If you mean we need to start manufacturing something that's heavy, that's a non-starter for Alaska. We've got a small population. We've got a long way to send, especially heavy goods and services. It doesn't mean there aren't niche opportunities, but what we offer primarily is our natural resources. That includes our spectacular natural beauty, right? People all over the world want to come to Alaska. And even, I would say, our lifestyle. There are people who want to live here. Those things create lots of everything, really. Every marketable thing creates opportunities for entrepreneurial people. But beyond education, I'm not sure. So that's a long, I'm not sure.
Well, Dan, thank you very much. Great presentation. The issue of Alaska resident hire is on everybody's mind these days. Love to see what you think is going on. What impact did the recession have, and what do you project going forward?
Yeah, good question. Good to see you, Florian. I haven't seen you for a while. We will release our newest data set on non-resident employment, and here's a little secret. It's going to show a slight decline, we think, in preliminary numbers in percent of non-resident workers in Alaska. And that gives me an opportunity to make an important point. Sometimes Alaskans get so hung up on reducing the percentage of non-resident workers here that here's the mistake not to make. Every job that a non-resident gets does not take a job away from a resident. More often than not, 16 out of the last 20 years, when the number of non-resident workers goes up, the number of resident workers also goes up. 4 out of the 20 years, one's gone up. They've gone the opposite direction. So, and part of the point there, Skagway is a great example. Skagway cannot provide all the resident workers to do all the work there. So the choice is to have, 2,000 jobs, 80% of them held by non-residents and the other percentage by residents, or fewer jobs for residents. I didn't make that point very well. But in recessions, typically what we see is the percentage of non-residents goes down because the whole economy kind of ramps down. So by all means, we should study the non-resident data to see where there are opportunities to train more Alaska workers to get those jobs. But we shouldn't get too hung up on keeping the outsiders out at the expense of economic activity that would help Alaskans. That's a mistake that gets made all the time, and it's a problem. Done?
Hello.
Oh.
Okay. So Dan, I'm from a workforce development training organization, to be specific, Job Corps. So, we always look at our training to be in tune with the need of our Alaska workforce. You mentioned that from high school, a student or a graduate cannot be an electrician or anything for that, right? So what are we going to do as a state to bridge this gap? Because there is a gap between training and the workforce. As a workforce development agent here, what vehicle of change or whatever we are going to use to bridge that gap, so in the end, we would be able to fill in the need of Alaska's workforce where, since this morning we're talking that there's big demand of this workforce from 2016 moving forward.
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is, I think, several things. One, Elwood's article that he just recently wrote, calling attention to these things that are happening. Two, I hope, our work showing where the jobs are going to be. Three, people like you attending here to help disseminate that information. My shop should do more to get into the high schools, and I hope they use some of our data and some of our publications to get that message out. So several things, and I get really interested when I hear, Scott talked about it this morning, about industry cooperating and helping fund training opportunities, because that's a win-win for both sides. If industry's saying, here's what we need, not that thing that's dying, but this thing that's just emerging. I mean, I remember talking with Florian about a safety engineer type occupation that was emerging. If the training providers know that and can make that adjustment, if there's lots of coordination, lots of these types of meetings, I think that's part of the solution. But I also think back to the good K-12s. I remember reading once Procter & Gamble and a GE guy were talking, and somebody was asking, well, is it better to have good engineering and math background or good liberal arts background? And they both agreed it didn't matter very much as long as they were hard. You know, they require discipline. They require showing up to work on time. They require problem solving. That was fascinating to me. And those were two examples. I mean, there are some industries that absolutely require a specific technical expertise. But back to the point that if our K-12 schools are excellent, that makes everything better. And you know, we're working on that, obviously, but yeah.
Hi, my name is Ann Adasiak Andrew, and I'm with Career and Technical Education for the Anchorage School District. And to respond to your question and to help educate the room, the Anchorage School District has, not only through King Tech, but at all 8 of our high schools, career and technical programs. And we've been doing 2 things. You've heard about the middle college, where students, juniors and seniors, are able to get articulated dual credit with the university system for the classes that they're taking there. And that expanded. Last year we were only at Eagle River, and now there's another site location here in Anchorage with UAA. But the career and technical programs are working with industry advisories to make sure that the curriculum is aligned to what industry needs and that the students are getting industry recognized credentials as juniors and seniors coming out of those programs. What that does is that graduating with a diploma, they can get more than a minimum wage job. They still need more training, but it gives them a leg up, and it gives you someone that has some of those basic skills. And then we want those things to align with the 6-month, 1-year, 2-year, 4-year programs. So that's happening here in Anchorage. That's happening now. That's part of a revolution that CTE and working with industry is bringing into and reaching into our high school programs. And so thank you, the industry members who have been participating and providing feedback in our classrooms and helping us adjust curriculum, and for taking our students on. And I'll be asking you all more about internships for our juniors and seniors in the time to come. Thank you.
I love hearing that. Articulation agreements, ways to get credit for what you're learning from either apprenticeships or other training programs to, again, blur that line. It's learning, it's something that we shouldn't try to draw this hard line between. Robert.
Curious, when the Medicare expansion debate was ongoing, there was some projections for job growth that were kind of wildly exuberant. And I know in Southeast we saw growth, but it was rather modest. And your projections here are, I think, fairly strong. I was wondering if you could elaborate what you saw as driving that.
Well, what we attribute it to primarily is the aging of the workforce. Not workforce, the aging of the population. But it's been going on. I was just looking. We have an article from 1989 that talks about the nursing shortage. Right. So this strong growth has gone on for a long time. The estimate that I remember, I'm not sure if it's right, was 4,500 statewide jobs for Medicaid expansion, something like that. Those things are hard to truth check even after the fact, because lots of things are always happening at the same time. We don't see a distinct bump from Medicaid expansion, but there's not much question that additional, assuming that the people who were newly Medicaid eligible went to the doctor, that obviously created new activity. Quantifying it is tough. At the time they asked us, we didn't do any estimates, but they asked us, does that seem reasonable? And I remember the answer being the consultants who produced those numbers were reputable consultants, and that it wasn't wildly, bad or too high, too low, whatever. But there are always politics in those kinds of things, so you're right to be kind of a cynic. Yeah.
Hey, Dan.
Fred.
All of your graphs were talking about the projections, wages, job growth, occupational growth by industry and occupation. But what is your research saying about the opportunities demographically? What does our workforce look like, and how is that changing, and maybe where are there opportunities where some of those demographics, whether they're race or age or otherwise, are moving? And you just kind of give us an example of what's going on there.
Yeah, we have a graph that I love because it shows in and out, it shows net migration by age. And what it shows is that Alaska consistently attracts a lot more 20 through early 30-year-olds than, more people are moving here than moving away. Alaska it's the land of adventure, it's the land of opportunity. That's pretty cool. We consistently lose more seniors than we get. People, not too many, we're not Florida, we're not Tucson. A lot of Alaskans who are senior will stay here just because they've always been here. But of concern is in the last 5 years, we're losing more from mid-30s to mid-40s that we used to be net positive there, now we're net negative. And the trouble with that is those people also take their kids. So demographically, the short-term trends are not happy. We hope that will turn around when the economy turns around. But still, we attract a lot more 20-year-olds than leave. We send a lot of kids off to college. We export more college students than we import. But in the post-college years, we bring a lot in. And to the entrepreneur, those are the people, they're willing to roll the dice and take chances if we have the right environment, the right climate, the right kind of almost energy. Then that's when I came. I don't know how many of you came in your 20s. Alaska's it's a magnificent adventure, right? And it delivers when you get here. So yeah, that's again, I'll give that a C- answer, but yeah. But you're right to think about demographics. Demographics are important. Our working age population hasn't grown for a long time. Our population's grown a little bit, but there are people who are aging out of the workforce, and that matters as we think about the availability of workers.